Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty significant.
We
A
are.
whole collection of sources giving us a really close look at, well, one of the most famous people on the planet,
Yeah.
Justin Bieber.
Yeah, and these aren't just, random articles. We've got observations, interviews, reporting from people really close to the situation.
People right there.
Exactly. So our mission here is to, really dig into these sources, pull out the key stuff, the surprising bits.
And try to get a clearer picture of what's actually been going on, especially the challenges, the money side, and the big influences in his life now.
That's the plan. Let's get into it.
Okay, so right off the bat, these sources paint a picture of, well, profound personal struggle. Pretty intense stuff.
It really is. We've all seen headlines, sure, but this is different. Hearing directly from his world, even his own words. He talks about, 8 years?
8 years of intense mental health battles, yeah.
And it's deep. He apparently talked about suicidal thoughts, like asking if the pain would ever actually stop. And accounts from people around him suggest this isn't, a one-off thing. It's described as a consistent pattern of difficulty.
And you sometimes see reflections of that outwardly, don't you? Reports mentioning him looking thinner or having dark circles under his eyes sometimes.
Yeah, those physical signs get mentioned. And then there's this phrase that keeps popping up in the sources, mantrams.
Mantrams, okay. Tell me about that.
So that term comes directly from sources close to him. They talk about these childhood tantrums kind of evolving
Into adult outbursts.
Right. And interestingly, they often link these mantrams, as they call them, specifically to anger about money.
That's fascinating, isn't it? How maybe deep-seated emotional stuff or mental health struggles could come out as frustration over something like finances.
It's complex, and the sources also point to these really public moments of distress, things people actually saw.
Like crying on stage during the Justice Tour, that got a lot of attention.
That's one example they cite, yeah. And also posting that really raw essay online about feeling unworthy.
Oh, I remember that.
And sources connect that back to something you often hear about with young, super successful people.
That imposter syndrome thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Grappling with feeling like you don't actually deserve all the fame, the money, that can be, incredibly destabilizing for anyone.
And the sources, they don't really shy away from his past substance use either, the stuff he's admitted to.
No, they mention the MDMA, Xanax, marijuana, mushrooms. He even described a time, didn't he, where he'd wake up and immediately use pills and smoke just to get through the day.
Just to start the day, yeah.
And these sources revealed that recent concerns, they sort of flared up again after Coachella.
Right, that appearance.
Yeah, accounts from people there, both close contacts and fans apparently, described him looking really out of it, slumped over.
Leading to speculation about drug use again.
Specifically mushrooms, maybe smoking a blunt. That's what the sources report was being speculated.
But then there's the other side. His team pushes back hard on that.
Oh yeah. The sources include the counterpoint. His reps. People around him strongly deny any hard drug use. They call that talk nonsense.
Okay, so denial from the team.
But the sources themselves offer a bit more, nuance. They point out that hard drug can be a subjective term.
Sure.
Mushrooms, for instance, they undeniably affect your mood, your perception. That's not really debatable.
Right.
And there's also this observation in the source material that when mental health does come up, his team seems to kind of run from it. Try to redirect the conversation.
Which creates this really stark contrast, according to the people feeding into these sources. You've got the team saying he's in the best place ever.
Right.
And then you have his own public words like, I'm trying to figure stuff out, I need help.
Yeah. The sources describe that disconnect as really sharp. It's like they're asking, okay, who are you going to believe here? Right? Your lying eyes kind of thing.
It just shows how hard it is to know what's really happening when you have these different narratives, right?
Yeah.
What he says, what the team says, what observers say.
Absolutely. And adding another layer, some sources even use this comparison, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Okay, what do they mean by that?
Well, they describe him as being, incredibly sweet, charming 1 minute, and then displaying what they see as a kind of narcissistic personality the next. But the insight they offer isn't necessarily, oh, he's unstable.
Right.
It's more that maybe these different sides are coping mechanisms developed under all that intense pressure.
That makes sense.
And they're quick to add, look, nobody can be sweet and perfect all the time, especially not someone living under that kind of microscope. It might just reflect the enormous strain he's under.
It really sounds like these personal struggles are just deeply tangled up with all the pressure. And speaking of pressure, let's talk about the money, the finances. These sources really go there.
They do, and the numbers are staggering. Career earnings estimated somewhere between, what, $500 million and $1 billion?
$500 million to $1 billion, which makes the next bit from the sources just, wow.
Yeah.
They report that in 2022, despite all that money earned,
He was on the verge of financial collapse.
on the verge of collapse,
Yeah.
with potentially $1 billion earned. How?
It's shocking, right? And the sources directly link the situation to him selling his entire music catalog, all the rights, for $200 million.
Okay.
And they frame it not as some strategic genius move, but as being sold out of desperation, because he apparently had to sell it now, like right now in December 2022.
Even though waiting a few weeks would have been better tax-wise.
Exactly. Scooter Braun, his manager at the time, reportedly advised waiting until January for a tax break. But the sources say the urgency was so high, indicating he was so broke, that he did it immediately.
That kind of urgency.
Yeah.
It points to something serious going on behind the scenes. But still, how do you burn through that much money?
Well, the sources give examples of just incredibly extravagant spending. Renovating a tour bus for maybe $2 million.
$2 million on a bus.
Insisting on only flying heavy private jets, which are way more expensive. A hotel stay in Iceland reportedly costing $60,000 a night.
$60,000 a night.
Yeah. Even sources who seem more sympathetic reportedly admit he spent wildly.
I guess that kind of spending, plus the huge costs of touring, it could add up, even with massive income.
For sure. And this financial strain seems to be right at the heart of the conflict that blew up with Scooter Braun, especially after the Justice Tour got canceled.
Right. He pulled the plug on that after, 49 shows, canceled like 81 remaining dates.
And this was after the Ramsay-Hunt syndrome diagnosis, the facial paralysis everyone saw, that forced the initial postponement.
So the tour cancellation must have created a huge financial mess.
Hugely complicated, according to the sources. AEG, the promoter, had paid a big advance, like $40 million. When the tour was canceled, Justin apparently owed them back a chunk of that, maybe $24 million.
Okay.
Scooter's company, Hib, reportedly stepped in and assumed that debt for Justin.
So Scooter paid AEG.
Effectively, yeah. With an agreement, a note saying Justin would pay Hib back that $24 million over 10 years.
And that's where things went south.
That's where the dispute really ignited, based on these accounts. Sources report Justin made just one payment on that debt to Hib and then stopped.
He just stopped paying. Why?
His side, mainly through his business manager, Lou Taylor, started claiming that Scooter had actually been way overpaid commissions for years, basically saying, "You screwed me."
Accusing Scooter of taking too much money.
Yeah. So this kicked off audits. Scooter ordered an internal one at his company, Hive, which initially showed Justin owed them about $1 million more.
Which Justin's team disputed.
Right. So Scooter then hired Price Waterhouse, the big independent firm.
Okay, an outside look.
And their audit came back with a very different number. It didn't support the $1 million claim. It concluded Justin didn't owe $1 million. He actually owed Hib over $8 million.
$8 million. Not one.
A huge difference. The sources mentioned Justin's team then did their own audit, but apparently they haven't shared the results publicly. And importantly, they haven't, according to these sources, disputed that $8+ million figure from the independent PwC audit.
So you've got independent auditors saying he owes millions, but his side feels wronged.
It's exactly that clash. One side's strong feeling of being screwed financially versus what the audits and contracts apparently show. Scooter's perspective, as presented in the sources, tends to blame Justin's spending and him wanting to quit touring for the financial problems.
While Justin's side, on the tour specifically, felt like he was being pushed too hard, set up for failure, put out like a show pony when he wasn't ready.
That's the counter-narrative presented, yeah. And this whole financial fight has to be seen through the lens of their history.
Definitely. Scooter found him when he was just 13.
Was like a surrogate father, built him into this global phenomenon. Justin clearly saw him that way initially, trusted him completely.
But now, the sources say Justin feels totally fleeced, bamboozled. He believes Scooter screwed him on commissions.
But here's where the sources add that crucial bit of perspective on the bamboozlement claim. They stress that legally, based on the actual contract signed and based on multiple audits, including the independent one, Scooter is actually owed money. There's reportedly no evidence from these audits that Scooter did anything shady or illegal.
So the feeling doesn't match the paperwork.
Pretty much. The suggestion from sources is that Justin's intense feeling of being wronged might be influenced by others. People in his ear telling him Scooter was stealing, even if the numbers don't back it up.
Wow. Okay, so we've got personal struggles, financial chaos, and then relationships. His marriage to Hailey Bieber is another big focus in these sources, described as extremely hard, lots of road bumps.
Yeah, and Hailey herself has apparently said, pretty point blank, that at one point she just didn't want to do this anymore.
That's quite an admission publicly.
It really highlights the level of difficulty they've apparently navigated.
There's even this interesting detail in the sources about Justin maybe joking it was an arranged marriage.
Right, referencing her Christian background, shared values leading to them being introduced. Some sources even state it quite directly. It was definitely an arranged marriage.
Regardless of how it started, a huge issue they faced, according to these accounts, is the fans. Specifically, the fans still hung up on Selena Gomez.
Oh, the Team Selena thing. Yeah, sources say that's been incredibly difficult, describing Hailey being treated like crap online, constantly told she'll never be Selena Gomez.
That must be brutal.
Sources call Selena a thorn in their side, but interestingly, they frame it as being primarily about Hailey's perception of Selena. One source even says Selena is living rent-free in Hailey's head, always serving as a benchmark.
That's intense external pressure in a relationship.
No kidding. But then you get a totally different perspective on Hailey from other sources. Some say she actually doesn't mind the spotlight at all, that she loves it, and views their marriage as like a young version of Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Okay, so competing views there too.
Definitely. There are even claims in some sources that Hailey was 100% convinced to be sort of a stalker early on. It just shows how varied the narratives are around her role.
And the sources also really emphasize how Justin's own past, his lot of trauma, impacted the marriage significantly.
Yeah, they talk about a breakdown in the very first year. Hailey apparently called her mom, crying, saying, "I just can't do it."
Wow.
And there was apparently a lack of trust initially, partly because she'd seen his whole Playboy phase, dating and sleeping with lots of women.
That makes sense.
And there's a suggestion from sources that maybe Justin came into the marriage thinking she could fix him, which is, a huge amount of pressure to put on someone.
An unfair burden, really.
Totally. But despite all these documented struggles, the sources also say things like they have worked it out, they seem tight, they seem very much in love.
So they got through it.
It seems so, based on these accounts.
Yeah.
And they describe Hailey now as being very protective of him. So it's not painted as a simple story of failure, but one of, ongoing effort and resilience.
Okay. And layered onto all this is the theme of outside influence, like a powerful figure in his life.
Yeah, the sources talk about a kind of Svengali or guru figure. First, it was maybe Carl Lentz and Hillsong, and now the focus seems to be on Judah Smith.
And this is where things get pretty controversial, according to the sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
With former friends feeling pushed out.
Exactly. Some former friends, associates, people who feel ghosted, they allege that the church, particularly Judah Smith, has a grip on him. Some go so far as to call it a cult.
A cult, that's a strong word. What's Judah Smith's response?
Well, the sources cite him basically laughing it off, saying something like, "If we're a cult, we're the worst cult ever. We meet once a month."
Okay. But others defend the church.
Yeah, sources who defend them say these cult attacks are just coming from people who got cut out and feel threatened. They argue the church figures are simply protecting Justin and genuinely care about him.
But there are more specific allegations, too, about money.
Yes, there's an account from a former staff member who actually sued the church. This person claims that a 10% tithe on gross income was non-negotiable for employees, and people could be fired if they didn't meet it.
10% mandatory.
That's the claim. And based on that requirement, this former stacker reportedly believes the church absolutely operates like a cult. The church's response cited is that the lawsuit was dismissed and the claims were settled.
Beyond the money, sources seem concerned about Judah Smith's influence more broadly, calling him controlling.
Yes, controlling not just personally, but professionally, too. That's a key point raised.
Professionally? How so?
The specific example that really makes sources nervous is his involvement with Justin's clothing line, Drew House. Judah is apparently on the board.
The pastor's on the board of the clothing company.
Yeah. Sources say that's where everyone starts to really raise his eyebrows. It blurs that line between spiritual advisor and business partner.
Okay, I can see why that would raise flags.
And there's a very pointed allegation that Judah, maybe alongside Lou Taylor, actively worked to drive a wedge between Justin and Scooter Braun.
How?
There's this one story recounted where they allegedly confronted Scooter, who is Jewish, asking him things like, "Why don't you love Jesus?" And apparently excoriating him for his beliefs.
Wow, that's intensive, true.
And it fits with the accounts of that meeting where Justin just kept repeating to Scooter, "You me over." The sources suggest Judah and Lou Taylor were right there, in his ear, telling him Scooter was stealing, despite what the audits showed.
And Lou Taylor's alleged comments, too.
Yeah, things like, "I am also a woman of the cloth. Justin can forgive you, but he can't move forward." Sources found that kind of language really unusual coming from a business manager during a financial dispute.
It definitely suggests a blend of influences, spiritual, emotional, financial, all wrapped up together.
Totally. And there's another story involving Ryan Good, Justin's best man, co-founder of Drew House. Sources say Justin and Judah allegedly grilled Ryan really intensely about his personal sex life, his dating life. Ryan reportedly felt it was super invasive, inappropriate coming from a pastor.
Yeah, that crosses the line.
Apparently this led Ryan to break contact with Judah, feeling the church was like a cult. And then the sources allege Justin just cut him off.
Cut off his best man.
That's the pattern these sources describe. Justin isolating from everybody in his life except the church, except for Judah. It sounds like a significant narrowing of his inner circle, seemingly guided by these figures.
Man. So with all this swirling around the personal stuff, the money drama, the relationship complexities, these powerful influences, where does his career even go from here?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Sources say he is working on music, apparently in Iceland. But yeah, it's been 4 years since the last album.
Can he come back?
Mm-hmm.
Like the way he was before?
The sources seem to think he can, purely based on talent and his existing fan base. But they also say it'll be a lot harder.
Why harder?
Well, the music industry keeps changing, right? And there's been a generational shift since his peak dominance. He's only in his early 30s, but in pop terms, he's a veteran, over 15 years in the game.
That's true. He's been around a long time.
But despite the time away, sources are clear. There's still huge demand for his music. He's still massively streamed. They think a new album would almost certainly debut at #1.
So the fans are still there.
Yeah, and his original fans have grown up too, right? They're getting married, having kids maybe, the audience is there, but maybe their lives look different now too.
So maybe a different kind of career. The sources mention him possibly becoming more of a legacy act.
That's definitely floated as a possibility,
Yeah.
especially since he's reportedly said he hated touring. He's canceled 2 major tours now.
Right?
A legacy act, doing residencies in one place, like Vegas. That can make serious money without the grueling travel. And it might fit better with having a family life.
So less global domination, more stability.
Could be. Which leads to the most fundamental question the sources raise about his future.
Does he even want to be that kind of global pop star anymore?
Exactly. And based on everything these sources describe, the pressures, the cancellations, the focus elsewhere, the feeling is maybe not. Maybe everything we've seen is he doesn't want to be a pop star anymore.
But financially, he'd probably be okay even if he scales back.
That's the sense you get from the sources. His legacy brings in money, residencies are lucrative. Plus, Hailey's company, Road Beauty, is apparently doing incredibly well. $1 billion business.
Yeah, it's huge.
So financially, the sources suggest he's probably in a position where he really can do whatever he wants professionally.
So looking back at this whole deep dive, based on these sources, it's just incredibly layered, isn't it?
It really is. We've touched on accounts of really deep personal struggles, mental health battles,
The surprising financial picture, the collapse fears, the disputes.
the complexities in his marriage, other key relationships, the impact of fame on them.
And these really powerful influences, particularly around his faith and certain figures.
Yeah. And our goal here, pulling from all these sources, wasn't about judging him or taking sides in these fights.
No, definitely not.
It was about trying to understand the really intricate, sometimes contradictory picture that emerges from these accounts. He's clearly a complex person in an almost impossibly complex situation.
Under just constant, intense public focus.
Right. And when you put all those pieces together, the vulnerability, the money pressures, the relationship strains, the competing influences, all played out publicly, yeah, it does make you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it leaves you with a pretty provocative thought.
What does this story, as told through these sources, really reveal about the true cost of getting that kind of unbelievable fame, that kind of fortune, so incredibly young? Regardless of the talent, regardless of the initial success, what's the actual price paid?
It's a heavy question. A lot to chew on.
Definitely.
Well, that was quite the deep dive. Thanks, as always, for joining us.